My name's Megan Dobney. I used to be an important trade union official, and now I'm a retired trade union official, feminist, socialist and tourist. I'll introduce the speakers specifically when I invite them to speak, but Christina, Philipa and Jenny. So if I can just cover some practical arrangements. We're filming the speakers, not the audience, and when the speakers have finished speaking, the camera will stop. We ask that you do not take photographs or audio recordings. Not everybody may wish to be recorded or photographed. And I'd be really grateful if you put your mobiles on silent, because we don't want lots of bells going off while people are speaking. But if you wish to do silent tweets, you can use the hashtag WPUK. There is to be no fire alarm drill this evening, so if there is a bell, you'll be following our colleagues there out of that door behind you, the door you came in. The toilets, which you may have seen, are off to the left, my left anyway. We're in an interesting room shape, so we were a bit uncertain as to how it was going to turn out, but I think we managed to fit the right number of chairs in without having to deviate round the corner there. Our speakers will speak for 15 to 20 minutes maximum, and they will get a warning when they're near the end of their time, because one of the key reasons for the meeting is to allow discussion and to include the people who are participating from the floor. And I will be asking you, when you make contributions, to keep them to 3 or 4 minutes. We will conclude the meeting at 9:30. So why women on the front line? Women's rights are only ever won by women coming forward to fight for them, and indeed to defend them. But women are not a coherent group. I mean, I share a sex with Theresa May, for instance. I don't think I need to go any further into that. So we will have differing views on this issue also. And that is the point of the debate. It's to allow discussion on the government's proposals on the Gender Recognition Act, to amend it, and the impacts on the Equality Act 2010. So we are aiming for an informed and informing event conducted with respect and consideration. So I'm sure we're going to all enjoy it and find it very interesting. So I'm beginning by introducing you to Philipa Harvey, who is from Women's Place UK and who is going to give us the background and whatever else.
Good evening, everyone. As Megan said, my name is Philipa Harvey, and I'm here representing Women's Place UK this evening, an organisation that has given a voice to women. Actually, we've demanded that our voice has been heard, and we will continue to do so. Before I go any further, I want to reiterate on behalf of Women's Place UK that we are against all forms of discrimination. We believe in the right of everyone to live their lives free from discrimination and harassment. We recognise that women face both endemic, structural and personal inequality. And in doing so, we recognise and unapologetically stand here today as a group that is campaigning to keep the rights we have won so far and demand the right that we still need to achieve the equality that is our right. The Equality Act also recognises this and therefore has sex as a protected characteristic so that sex discrimination can be challenged under law. Women's Place are pleased to see the impact of a current campaign to force local authorities to comply with the law over sex and gender. The importance of this should not be underestimated. As a result of a simple action of contacting local councils around Britain, they have been forced to change legally inaccurate equalities information on their websites. It's surprising how many authorities have been found to be in breach of the Equalities Act by stating that gender is a protected characteristic as opposed to sex, and some authorities have listed the two terms interchangeably. So as a result of this grassroots campaign, local authorities have sought to rectify this. Women from across Britain are now writing to their local councils to ensure that they have the correct list of the 9 protected characteristics. This is what good grassroots campaigning looks like. It's letter writing, emailing, requesting. There has been no hate. There has been no need for it. We are working within the law and we are using facts. There has been challenge when required. So if in response to requests where no action was taken, campaigners went back to the law and back to facts. Clackmannanshire initially replied to queries by saying, "Hi, we talk about gender discrimination rather than sex discrimination as it's more inclusive." There was a flurry of responses, and these included people pointing out that their response was debatable, but what isn't debatable is that sex is a protected characteristic, and whatever your views on the matter, they were failing in their statutory duties and risking non-compliance in their actions. And if they elected to ignore this. After being challenged by the campaigners, they have now corrected their guidance. Derbyshire County Council also initially questioned the incorrect use of their terms, but after women contacted them to challenge this position, they agreed to change the wording acknowledging their error. "It's an error, and we apologise," they said. "Language used on our website is incorrect in places where we refer to the protected characteristics. We're amending this and ensuring our draft policies refer to sex and gender as separate issues. We appreciate your comments." This is the sort of campaign that we have been involved in. Many other councils have corrected their guidance after lobbying, and the Welsh Government has made the changes after being contacted by campaigners. Women across the UK will continue to challenge councils and other organisations who are getting equality law wrong. The 9 protected characteristics in law are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. We are aware that there are many policies that fail to comply with this equalities law across local authorities and other public bodies and institutions. And so this is an ongoing campaign for us. The reason it's important is that it particularly impacts on the perception of what legal protections women have and the extent of the duties organisations have towards us as women. Some organisations are implying that they will protect the concept of gender, which most feminists think, and I think most of us in this room would agree with, is a stereotypical notion of what being a woman is. It's not just this sort of notion of stereotypical. That whole notion is really deeply harmful and has a deeply harmful impact both on girls and boys and women and men. And it places an arbitrary behaviour and aspiration at the same time as fueling a real prejudice and discrimination on everybody. Whilst doing this audit of public sector equalities policies, we found that the Equality and Human Rights Commission utilised the terms sex and gender interchangeably as well, which we have to say is quite worrying in that they make and create the climate for other organisations to follow. And if they don't understand the importance of sex as a protected characteristic, how can other people? So, other organisations have acknowledged and apologised for their error and have begun to change their policies, and we are pleased by those organisations being willing to change. We hope this starts a national discussion about why the Equality Act 2010 exists and the importance of sex as a protected characteristic. Women still have a long way to go before we have equal rights. Sex matters. It's about sex, it's not about gender. Sex as a characteristic needs and must be protected so that as women we can continue to fight discrimination, inequality and the harassment and violence that women face on a daily basis. It's reflected in a myriad of ways, and we've heard a lot in the media recently about the high levels of sexual harassment and violence against women and girls. Sexism affects everyone. However, as we know, women are disproportionately affected. We've also heard in the media about the inequality at all levels of society that occur through the gender pay gap, something most employers had to report on recently. These manifestations of inequality are why sex is a protected characteristic in the Equality Act, and Women's Place believe this protected characteristic must be defended. Our demands are then around this, that We've been very clear about what our demands are, and regardless of what you may have read or heard anywhere else, I'll just go through them. And I have to say, we are demanding these things. We are doing it respectfully and we are doing it politely, but we are demanding this. It is not now the time to ask politely, but to demand respectfully. Respectful and evidence-based discussion about the impact of the proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act, that be allowed to take place, and that the women's voice is heard in that debate, and that's a really important part of it. The principle of women-only spaces should be upheld and, where necessary, extended, and that a review of how exemptions in the Equality Act, which allow for single-sex services or requirements that only women can apply for jobs, such as in domestic violence refugees, are applied in practice. A review of that. And that government consults with women's organisations on how self-declaration would impact on women-only services and spaces. And I think when they consult and they listen, we should also see the evidence of the fact that they've consulted with in whatever we see coming out of that. The government needs to also consult on how self-declaration will impact on data gathering, such as crime, employment, pay and health statistics, and monitoring of sex-based discrimination, such as the gender pay gap. And this evening I want to talk a little bit more about that data gathering. This meeting is called A Woman's Place on the Front Line, and I was asked to speak not only as a representative of Women's Place, but also as a trade union activist. As trade union activists, when we campaign, we use facts. That's what we use. We use those facts to campaign and to get our arguments across. We look at what the impact of changes to these facts will be if there is a change in legislation, in conditions, in funding, through any sort of policy change. So we need, as campaigners, accurate, reliable facts. These must be robust and they must be open to scrutiny. Therefore, if we're looking at facts linked to the gender pay gap, that's one of those things that they must be reliable. We need to be able to look at things in terms of the rates of progression by sex, progression through careers, equality to access to continuing professional development and training. We need to be able to look at the rates of sexual harassment, the levels of domestic violence, and the levels of sexual assaults committed. We need to be able to look at access to medical screening and the funding that's required to see programs through. There are so many areas of our lives, both in work and in our daily lives, that affect our work, that we need to be able to rely on data and facts for. I just want to look at a couple of those in a bit more detail. In order to have accurate information and data and evidence to look at the issue around the gender pay gap, you need to collect data related to those who have always worked as women, people who have never benefited from being in work as men with the inherent benefits that men get in the workplace. In fact, people who have not benefited from being educated as male, with the expectations that enable them to access particular subjects that are deeply embedded in our society. This takes us back to those damaging and discriminatory impacts of gender stereotyping that play such a negative role in our society, let alone the overt sexist attitudes that exist in many workplaces and the sexist behaviours in relation to maternity issues that occur in our workplaces. Data will be affected and become invalid if it is not a true reflection of the facts. There could also be an impact, therefore, on that gap, and it could therefore hide the true gender pay gap. It is commonly known as the gender pay gap, but it is more accurate to describe it as a sex pay gap. The figures may well be very small that we are considering when we consider how self-declaration will impact on data gathering when monitoring of sex-based discrimination, such as the gender pay gap, but there is already evidence that there is diminishing levels of participation in equalities monitoring because women are withdrawing from the process that they no longer value. So what we are seeing in those very facts that we rely on to campaign, they're being skewed already by lack of participation, lack of clarity with definitions that are not clear, and a lack of trust in the data that is likely to result from the monitoring and the collection. There are also issues related to biologically defined stages in life, such as pregnancy and menopause. will women be inclined to participate in data collection that refers to them as a person with a uterus or a person with a cervix? We are women who may be going through a biological stage in our life. The discrimination we face in the workplace during these stages is something that we have fought against for decades, in fact, for centuries. If, in fact, we were allowed to remain in work in the past, when we were in those stages of our lives, because sometimes we were fighting the discrimination that we weren't even allowed to be in work in those biological stages. And many of this is linked to the career progression and pay progression, that the inequalities in career and pay progression. The data that we are collecting must be true. It's also vital that as a society we are made aware of the extent of sexual harassment and violence against women and girls. We must tackle this, and in order to do this we need the facts. This means we need reliable and accurate data. I've said that a lot today, so it's clearly something that is really important for us. This means that it must reflect the sex-based nature of this harassment and abuse. There is already a woeful lack of services for all victims of sexual violence, and we must have the most robust facts and data to secure the much-needed resources for victims of all sexual violence and abuse. I'm very cognizant of the significance of being here with you this evening. Many of us will have had to have considered the implications of attending, whether it's to speak from the floor or from the platform, or simply to attend and to listen, whatever your point of view. How utterly astounding it is to me that we cannot gather together as women in the majority to discuss and debate and to reflect on how law will changes in law will impact upon us as women. How truly shocking it is that there are those that have sought to restrict and even silence our voices, often in an intimidating, threatening, and sometimes violent climate, when we rightly wish to discuss, debate, and reflect on laws that could remove our hard-fought-for rights and services, services which have literally saved lives. I've now attended three other meetings, apart from this one, that we have hosted in other locations. And what I've been struck by all those meetings, that were all very different in sort of nature, was the relief that was palpable in the room, that here was somewhere that we could talk, here was somewhere that we could listen, here there was somewhere that we could think, we could disagree and agree, but we could have a discussion about women for women. And I would like to thank you for attending this evening, and I look forward to a respectful and reflective discussion this evening, and thank you for attending.